have with us, as you can see in front of us, the Grand Harmony Chorus of Sweet Adelines International, and they have been here before a couple of times. And welcome them again, and they will be singing O Canada for us, and I would invite everyone to stand for our national anthem. Thank you very much. And before you, I'm not sure what your plans are, but we're going to take just a few minutes to talk about the 20th anniversary of this building. You're welcome to stay for a few minutes if you have some. Otherwise, you are free to leave. And thank you very much for being here. It's not only great singing, but the body English for many of you was great as well. So thank you for that resounding rendition of our national anthem. Now, as many of you know, you're welcome to sit down or stand as you wish. As many of you know, this is the 20th anniversary of this City Hall, and I thought it would be just worthwhile taking just a few minutes to go down memory lane in some of the things that have happened. And get my own slide up here. And that in preparing for this, and it will only take a few minutes as we go through just about a dozen slides or so, I had the opportunity to go through some old files in checking out some of the history of how we got to where we did in 1993. Joining us this evening are Brian Storts, who was an alderman at the time, and part of the steering committee. Terry Boutelier and Laurie Prue were on staff, very instrumental, both of them, in leading the project from a staff perspective. And Jeff Lorenz, who was an alderman at the time as well, sends his regrets for not being able to be here tonight. So you see in front of you the finished product. In the, as I was looking at the plaques out there on the mayor's wall, there is a picture or a relief of two previous city halls. And one was the Gemeindehaus Berlin, or the Berlin Town Hall, which was built in 1869 and was served this community until 1924. The population was 3,056. Yes, precise, 3,056. And it was built for a grand total of $3,808. A little different than what the next city hall was, and built in 1924 and served this community well until 1973. The mayor of the day was Elo Breithaupt, and the cost was $337,000. Still a far cry from today's figures. So in 1973, the a great deal of a committee was formed to investigate both the short and the long-term options for the administration space. When the City Hall, the 1924 City Hall, was demolished, I would say with the support of a referendum, the facility, the municipal offices and the council chambers were moved across the street to 22 Frederick, which at the time, if my memory serves me correctly, was the Oxley Development Corporation out of Edmonton. And they were building the mall across the street, Market Square, and this tower, and there was a 20-year lease that was initiated at that point in time. So in January of 1988, there were 21 sites that were looked at and evaluated. And interestingly enough, and I had forgotten this, but ultimately there was unanimous approval for expropriation of the block that we currently have this City Hall on. And in December later that year, the payments were approved for all of the property owners who had been expropriated at that site. And I believe that then Treasurer and now Councillor John Gazzola probably signed those checks. In February of 1988, there was, I'm just going to go through a series of slides from that block and comment on some of the time frames. In February of 88, just a month after that, the size and the basic requirements of the new City Hall were being determined. And again, in February of 88, the budget was finally approved. A couple of months later, in April of 88, there was requirement of approval by the OMB, and they gave their approval at that time. And 1 month later, you can see, I'm sorry, it's 89. I said 88, it was 89. And in May of 89, the National Architectural Design Competition brief was put out. It was sent to 550 registered architects across this country. And in April and May of 1989, and as you can all imagine, this was, and those of you who lived it certainly know that, it was a very controversial decision at the time, similar to other things that we have done subsequently. But there was still some opposition within council, and there was a survey by 3 aldermen at the time, and I know that the references do make that the methodology of that survey was questioned, and just want to read, and I might have been a little feistier in my day back in 1989. I know someone's going to call me a pack rat, but I found notes of some of the things that I said that evening. Reminded people that it was a unanimous decision by council to choose that site, and that we now own the block, and that, but this doesn't seem that there's a not so subtle agenda to simply kill the project, even though the alternatives have been looked at and would be just as costly or more costly in the long run. And I went on with some other comments. I had the privilege of serving as vice chair of that, the building committee at that time. In May of 1989, just a few weeks later, we reaffirmed, the city reaffirmed its intention to build the new City Hall and Civic Square as a result of that survey and the questions that were raised. It was actually just prior to that May 89 motion, which was approved 9-2, and I also picked out some old articles from the then called the Kitchener-Waterloo Record, and a familiar name, an article cropped up in my records, and it was a columnist by the name of Frank Etherington who wrote at the time, "The city should be prepared to pay market price for an attractive city hall that will hopefully serve as a municipal focal point for the next 100 years. And it talks about some of the design features. And I hope they retain that vision and refuse to sacrifice lasting architecture beauty in the name of political expedience. And no one has used political expedience around this horseshoe ever since that time. As I was saying, it was a 9-2 vote to reaffirm that discussion, and these photographs, as the dates are there, as during construction dates, obviously. Then there were ongoing discussions about the size of the rink. In April 1990, on a 6-5 vote, there was a motion to retain the ice rink and the reflecting pool. Those discussions kept going on, back and forth for quite some time. And again in April 1990 then, this was sort of the ultimate of resolutions of many that were going through as to what would be included, what elements would be included, and what would not be in or out of the project. Again on that date, I'll go back one. There was this really struck me, and some of the things that we would never talk about today. So one of the motions that came forward, or at least one of the suggestions, was that we removed the sprinkler system from above the 3rd floor of the tower. Do you think today, the chief isn't here tonight, oh yes, Derry. Do you think today the fire chief would even let us talk about that? The answer would be no. But thankfully, that motion was unanimously rejected. Also defeated on a 6-5 vote was to remove one floor from the office tower. It was felt that we had too much space. And also, another one that we would probably not even think of today, a motion, thankfully, was passed unanimously to take no action on the suggestion to downgrade barrier-free hardware allowance to standard hardware. And of course, we are adding new things into the facility even today related to barrier-free systems. So finally, on that date in April of 1990, there was one last attempt to have a referendum on the building of a new site, a new city hall, and that too was defeated on a 6-5 vote. So you can see most of the controversial items for this facility did go through on a 6-5 vote. The tender was awarded in August of 1991 to Ellis Dawn for the construction price, not the total price of the project, but the construction price of just a little bit over $42 million. And of course, this is what you see today. The move-in date, I don't remember the exact date, but I'm sure somebody out there would remember that, it was in August, and the opening, the official opening, was on September the 18th. Of 1993. So with hindsight, I think most people in this community would say it was a good investment. There was a love-hate relationship at the time in terms of the design, but I think most people had come to appreciate what it has to offer. There were jobs created during a recessionary time, and it has become very much a focal point of so many community events. And one anecdote that I often tell when referencing that opening day, after we had the ceremony out in Civic Square, there was a reception in the rotunda, and down the center of it were some tables with the refreshments on it, and I was following two gentlemen, and I did not recognize them. I believe they were from out of town, but I'm not absolutely certain of that. And they sort of, looking around up in the rotunda and screwing up their noses a bit and saying, what the heck would they ever use this space for? And when you think of that today and the kinds of entertainment, trade shows, fine dining, other meetings, choral music, whatever, that happens in that space, it has certainly proven its worth over the last 20 years. So for anybody who had anything to do with the planning and the construction of this City Hall, I want to thank you very much. And I forgot one thing, that the successful architect was Kuabera, Payne, McKenna, Bloomberg. And in fact, it was this City Hall was one of the first major projects that they did, and it helped to launch their career. They subsequently went on to many major projects, including the design of the Canadian Embassy in Berlin quite a number of years ago. So with that, just a bit of history and going down memory lane in terms of what this City Hall has meant to so many different people. And I hope you enjoyed a few of those anecdotes. We'll now move into the regular part of our council agenda. And it's moved by Councillor Barry Rabanovich that the minutes of the regular meeting held August the 26th, 2013, and special meetings held August 26th and September the 9th, as mailed to the Mayor and Councillors, be accepted. All in favour? Opposed? That's carried. And we do have one other visitor this evening that I should have talked about. We did have it at the committee meeting before as well, but this is the first council meeting where we have the youngest person behind the council chairs, and that is Callan William Seelock. And Councillor Galloway Seelock is determined to participate in as much of our meetings as possible, and Callan is quietly sitting here and enjoying every moment of it. We'll move to the rest of our agenda, and Heather Sinclair of the Creative Enterprise Initiative has indicated that she will not be here this evening, but is arranging for a future meeting. I think some of us have seen some of the presentations that have been made at various places throughout the community in terms of an update from the CEI, but she will come back at another time. Moving into the delegations then, the first two individuals were here to speak on the Filsinger Park Stream Naturalization Project, but they too gave us information today that they will not be here this evening. They have continued to meet with staff, and one of the individuals has also been talking to the neighbors, and I believe, Colin, that they were going to be having a meeting on site this, I think this is what you said, on Friday. So presumably those issues will be dealt with offline. So there are no other registered delegations nor any walk-ins this evening. So we'll proceed to the tenders. Is someone prepared to move the tenders? Moved by Councillor Ioannidis, seconded by Councillor Gazzola. Are there any questions? Councillor Gazzola.
A couple of questions. On the first one, can you briefly tell a little more about what happened to the original tender? This is a re-tender?
This is the chief? Or is this, who's on number 5? I'm not sure. Mr. Gordon.
Yes. Through you, Mr. Mayor, this original tender was T13005 and was awarded on April 29th of this year. Due to performance issues identified early in the process of the work, the original contract was canceled and the new tender was issued with the closing date of August 1st, and that's the tender that we're bringing forward.
What was the amount of that original tender?
Mr. Gordon, you have that
Just
there?
a minute, I have that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, and just
the original tender was $207,520.50 for the for a 3-year period. This one is substantially less,
But for
same period of time.
for this, well, what happened?
Can you, Mr. Chapman, maybe you have some additional information?
I think to speak to the differential, the specification was changed from the first tender to the second tender, and I believe that there were some repair components that were in the first tender that were excluded from the second one. So it is not an apples-to-apples comparison.
All right, it's going in the right direction at any rate. I wonder, on the third tender, if I could ask you, this arena refrigeration program, what are the benefits of doing this, or how does this work? Because we still incur substantial dollars for preventative maintenance.
Once again, through you, Mr. Mayor.
Gordon?
What takes place in this particular tender, there are 25 compressors over in our various arenas total. There you have a three times a year annual inspection and service, which amounts to approximately a total of $42,000. And the balance of that funding that is there is in case there are breakdowns and repairs, so that money is not necessarily spent, but that average price has been, I believe, about $137,000 a year over the past 2 years. So there is funding there to do repair work as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Fernandez. Before, you have questions on the same tender? Okay.
Are we're going?
I should
Just do one
have
and then-
said that earlier
Okay.
on.
Okay.
But pardon me for just one other interjection here. I did skip over one item on the agenda because it's something new that we've just added, and that to our agenda, and I missed that. And at the beginning of the meeting, asking if there are any pecuniary interests under the Conflict of Interest Act that need to be declared for any items that are on the agenda this evening. Councillor Singh.
Yes, this is to do with getting used to the new protocol with the LRT routes that had gone through committee. I'll declare a pecuniary interest as I have property in that vicinity. Going on the side of caution, declaring conflict related to that.
Okay, this would be Community and Infrastructure Services number 6.
Okay, number 6. Okay, you found it before I
Okay.
did. Thank you.
All right, now back to Councillor Fernandez.
I didn't have a question on the first tender.
Okay.
Mine is
Are
on the
there-
second.
Thank you, I'll come back to
Yep,
you.
that's
Are there any other questions on the first tender itself? Councillor Netsky?
Oh, the first one.
Yes.
It's just been answered.
Okay. All right. The third tender, since that one has already been talked about, any questions? Councillor Netsky?
Yes, thank you. On the third page of, or page 1, Roman numeral 2-3, the funding that's proposed from the following sources,
No, just a minute. The third tender, which is the arena refrigeration. Do you have any
Oh.
questions on that one? That's the one that Councillor Gazzola had raised.
Oh,
questions.
sorry. Okay. Yep, sorry. I went to the wrong page. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Of the refrigeration issue, to which arenas does this apply? To all of them, or are we just talking the auditorium, or what?
Mr.
No,
Gordon?
it applies to all of the municipal arenas.
Including the odd?
The odd, Grand River, Kent, Civic Square, Lions Arena, Sports World.
All of
and
the arenas.
Donald
Okay,
Plain.
perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, any further questions on the tenders? They've been moved and seconded. Well, there weren't any other, that's why I was waiting for them. Yes, I did. Okay, Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. I have a number of concerns about the tender number 2, which is the washroom construction at Victoria Park. $150,000 over the original budget is really concerning to me. So one of the questions that I had asked Mr. Gordon was about the retendering. And maybe you can explain what your response was, and then I'll have a further question.
And I should point out to Council that we should do at the same time 3-1 under the Committee of the Whole, which is the companion report related to the funding. So we'll do those together. We'll do them together, and the order in which we take them can be seen in a moment. So, Mr. Gordon, question of the retendering.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. It would be very difficult to retender this project at this time. Firstly, all the bidders' tender prices are known now, and they each know what the other one bid, which makes that a little difficult. The other thing, the only other issue that we would have would, if we were to retender that, there would be a timing requirement really to go out and do that. We would have to give a good amount of time to retender this project.
Would we not be putting it out for a public tender? Again, was this, I mean,
Yeah.
we would be retendered out because of the fact that it's over budget?
Yes,
So
it
it would be a
would.
public tender, it would be out on the internet. Are we not the ones who decide how long of a tender period we have? I mean, we could turn this around within a week. I mean, really, we're putting it out again for the ability for, because the component, I guess the concern I have here is the word masonry. As we well know that with Bill 73 coming to Queen's Park on Thursday and the whole issue of open and fair tendering, we know that we are being held to a policy that is 30 years old. I think that it's very important for us to recognize that this may be a component to partially why this tender is so high. And I think that given the fact that there's new information and a new bill being put forward in this week, I think that it gives us the right rationale to retender this. $150,000 over. I mean, I would rather see us retender this than have us turn this project down and have to start from scratch. I think we have the ability to do so, and I think that I would like to put that motion forward when it's the right time.
Okay, I won't take the motion at this time. There are several other people who wish to speak, and I think we probably need some information on the implications of that. I'm going to go through the four people that I have up here, and then we will come back and have staff respond to all of the questions at one time. Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And quite surprised when I saw this report. I really had thought that the $400,000 that we had originally approved, and with the CIF funding, that was going to be sufficient amount to the necessary allocation for the project. I thought that was a fair and reasonable amount. So I'll base it into my question. Two options are before us, and the later report speaks to it, either reassess the project or cancellation of the project. I would like to see that. Wouldn't, is what I'm saying. If there is a delay, Councillor Fernandez referred to retendering, but obviously I think the project would have to be rescoped for it to be tendered. But there is additional funding that's related to this project. How would that affect that?
If the project doesn't go through at this time, we would probably not get the project on board in time to use that funding. That's is what I believe.
Could you be more specific to the timing? March 31st? I thought I had seen in the past, but... Carl?
I'm sorry. Ms. Houston.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, this project needs to be completed by March 31st, and delaying at this point in time would, if we were to retender, would actually likely increase the cost because we'd be dealing with more winter work involved.
Had council, or if council were to approve this, as is requested by the report, how quickly would the work get started?
We will start the process right away to get the contractor on board to proceed with the work as quickly as possible.
How long was the process for tendering, Mr. Gordon?
Mr. Gordon?
Well, the tender itself, once the specifications are completed and given to Supply Services, it has to be on the street for 2 weeks. Then once the tender's closed, the tenders have to be reviewed for accuracy and then taken to the next council meeting after that time.
So 2 weeks and then next council meeting.
Well, there's a review period as well that the tenders would have to be reviewed before the recommendation could be prepared and taken to council.
Is there precedence where we've used an expeditious process because timing was an issue? Then?
I can't speak to that.
Okay.
Ms. Houston, I think, would like to add something.
In addition to the tendering time, there would also be, if we're changing the scope of the project, to change it significantly would result in new drawings, which would also add probably about 3 to 4 weeks to the process.
3 to 4 weeks, well. And when did we find out? When did we get this tender back? The tenders, when did we get start? You know, the tendering process was completed on this one. I know council is seeing this report as of it was made available on Wednesday last week, but when did staff have an idea that this is what we're looking at?
I'm going to get the closing. I don't have that closing date of that tender with me at this point. I can get that for you.
Okay, all right. I'll come back to some other questions and comments later, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Chapman?
The report notes that it closed on August the 29th, and so that's when the tender would have been opened, and at that point it would have been turned over to staff and the design consultant to review it for completeness and accuracy.
Councillor Yunetsky? Didn't take. Oh, someone's still got their microphones on. Let me just add a few more to it. We can do that. Let's see if it works now. Now we can go. Councillor Yunetsky.
Thank you very much. A couple of questions to staff in regard to this. I noticed that there was 41 interested parties who downloaded the information and 8 tenders that were received. Of those tenders that have been received, are any one of those contractors or construction firms non-union in terms of their employees?
I don't have the information currently of which are union and which are non-union. We don't ask those questions when we tender.
Okay, thank you.
But through you, Mayor Sayre, there is a standard provision in all of our tenders that obligates the contractor to use unionized labor for the masonry component. And again, we've been through this with council in the past because the city is a signatory to a contract. We obligate the general contractor or the subcontractors to employ unionized labor for the masonry work.
They may not be a fully unionized contractor, but for that masonry work, they would be.
Right, appreciate it. That's where I was sort of heading. In the deficit that we have here, there's 3 sources of funding that could be drawn from. One is the 48 Ontario building maintenance. Could you explain what that is? I don't know what that means.
Ms. Houston, go with you on this.
That is a general provision in our capital budget for it's the Legion building, and that was to fully replace the roof. I think we had $80,000 set aside to fully replace the roof, so we're leaving $15,000 in the account to allow for ongoing repairs of the roof as it is required, because there's no specific use for that building at this point in time. That's why we recommended that source of funding.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Councillor Etherington.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, some direction. I have some questions for staff, and then I have some comments.
Okay, let's deal with the questions first, please.
Okay. So, my first question, I'm referring to your report, INS 13089. That's the support report. It says one of the reasons for the extra cost is that the building is 200 square feet larger in area than originally conceived. Can you tell me why that was? Why is it 200 square feet larger?
Ms. Houston.
Some of that has to do with the skate change area and also the provision for the family washroom. You'll recall when the design came forward, that was a significant discussion about whether there would be a family washroom. So in order to accommodate those things, that made it a little bit bigger.
Thank you. And number 3, it talks about the increase in cost because of the sheer volume of plumbing. I would have thought, and I'm not trying to be smart here, but I would have thought that with a public washroom, we would have known that it had extensive plumbing. So I wanted to ask why we didn't know that. That's an extra cost of $29,000.
Really, that's an extra, the points on page 2 of the report are extra costs related to a typical building. So compared to a typical building where you can spread the cost of plumbing fixtures over a much larger square footage where the cost may be lower for the remainder of the building, this building is very intensive in terms of mechanical and plumbing, and that's why you'll see a per square foot cost higher than typical. The main reasons why this project is higher than the budget that was provided is when the budget was set, it was set based on an understanding that we didn't know what the building was going to be at that point in time because we hadn't approved whether we're going to be renovating or whether we were going to be putting an addition onto an existing facility or building new. That was something that was decided after the budget was set.
Okay. And number 4, heritage designation, we're talking about an extra, actually I thought it was $50,000, this says $41,000 extra because in order presumably to retain the heritage value. I guess my question is, we knew the washroom was in a heritage park, would we not have anticipated the costs of heritage requests when we first put a price tag on this?
Again, these points are relative to the square footage cost of a typical building. So having this facility in Victoria Park compared to perhaps one of our other parks, that would be a differential.
But we knew that.
Yes, we did.
And my last question, and I will have comments, but my last question relates to the overall factor that with what we knew, I guess what I'm struggling with here, Pauline, is that I'm not an engineering expert, but I rely on staff who are the experts to give me these costs. So I just wanted to ask generally if there is any way of reducing these costs without having to go to retender and quite frankly without getting into the usual anti-union stuff that I'm hearing again tonight. Is there any way of reducing the cost?
We did look at that, and there really isn't. In fact, the one option that we did put on the table in terms of the roof, changing it to asphalt shingles as opposed to cedar shakes, that's something we could do. Even Heritage Kitchener or our staff related to Heritage does not recommend that, but they could go along with it. There's really no other square footage we can get rid of in the facility without going to whole redraw of the facility, and if we were to do that, it wouldn't meet the needs that were identified through the consultation process in terms of what a public washroom was required. The number of stalls, the need for a family washroom, space to change for skate changing, and those types of things.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Chair, those are my questions. I do have comments later.
Okay. We'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, most of my questions have been answered. I really have a comment that I would like to make, though.
Okay. Then when we're finished with questions, perhaps you can press your buttons again, please. Councillor Urbanovic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Two questions, and then I'll chime in as well for some comments later on. But just to be clear, in terms of the $200,000 federal funding, so if we don't have this project completed by March 31st, we lose that funding, or portions of that funding?
I don't know the rules specific to this grant, but typically the grant would be prorated based on how much we got completed. So if we were 75% complete at that point, we would get 75% of the funding and that type of thing. So it's not an all or nothing kind of arrangement.
Okay. But obviously the longer that we continue, the longer that we wait before we start construction, the less of the building is going to be finished by the end of March. Okay. The next question, and Mr. Gordon, you started talking about the tender process when Councillor Fernandez was asking her questions. I really want to understand clearly what the implications are from a legal point of view if we don't accept these tenders, and if we were then to go back out to retender in this particular situation. Because I do recall back a number of years ago where I think somebody did come back and make a claim against the city around that kind of process issue.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. To go out and retender this project without making a substantial change to the specification of it really sets up a situation that I would refer to as bid shopping, where all of the bidders who originally bid know each other's prices, and then they start bidding off of that price. So it really isn't a fair tender process to the original bidder who met the specifications of the tender and was the low bidder.
And maybe this is a question specifically more appropriate for Ms. McDonald, but does that leave us open from a legal liability point of view?
Ms. McDonald?
I would suggest if you want legal advice in that regard, it would be best to go into caucus.
Can you give any sort of general answer around that without us going into caucus?
I'm going to have to say no. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure, Mr. Mayor, where we're going with this. I mean, there is a motion on the floor. If there's going to be other motions coming forward, then I think we probably need to get that legal advice first.
Okay, and we can do that. There are one or two. Were you questions? No. Okay, we've got two more questions, and then would entertain a motion to go into caucus. Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Aside from the roofing, and I know it's gone through extensive public consultation, but would we be free if we were to retender it to again to scale back some of the items like the roofing, the historical styled windows, the upscale premium brick masonry? Would we be able to do that in the retender?
Mr. Gordon.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. If we make substantial changes to the tender document itself, we're completely within our rights to retender the project.
And the items that I mentioned are not structural, so we should be able to do that without having to get things redrawn. Is that correct?
I'm not sure that your question.
Sure. The items in particular, the roofing material, the premium brick masonry, the historical styled windows, anything else that is part of this tender like that, if we were to drop that from the tender, it wouldn't require redrawing. It would simply require retendering. Is that correct?
Okay, the question is, would it require new specs? Yes, but would it require new
drawings,
architectural drawings or engineering drawings? And I think the question is being discussed. Ms. Houston?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
The question is, these very things that can be done that are not structural, change the specs, but does it require new engineering drawings?
Some of those things do, probably, because there's a slope of the roof and that type of thing. Some of the things like premium brick masonry and the actual type of roof, those types of things wouldn't need to. The thing to keep in mind is we'd have to take this back through Heritage Kitchener to get their comments on that, and that would take a number of weeks as well.
Does anyone know when Heritage meets next? Okay. And is there any, we've had several grants like this in the past, has there ever been any exceptions where we went past the deadline for a project and the federal government paid their share anyway? I guess what I'm asking is there a chance if we went past the deadline that they would cover it? Or can we ask somebody?
Mr. Chapman, what would be your memory on that? I'm not sure.
My recollection of that is typically that's happened where there's been a need across the province, so where either under Superbuild or previous grant funding programs, many municipalities were challenged to meet their deadlines. The province would create exemptions for a number that you could apply for. I'm not aware, I've not heard from other municipalities that they're facing challenges in achieving this deadline. It may happen as we get closer to the date, but I would be surprised if we're unique in this circumstance that we would be successful in achieving a one-off extension.
Mr. Chapman is correct. Even with the stimulus funds, they were
Stimulus funds and the
extended
Superbuild
to
funding as
another
well.
season, but that was national in scope.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Singh, a question only?
Yeah, I had the exact same question as Councillor Davey as to the aesthetic materials that can be used. That wouldn't change the entire scope of the project, where engineering would, drawings would be necessary, but I think that's been answered. Are there, I know we're playing off the cuff here a little bit, but to deal with the timing restrictions, are there other materials that are not as expensive that are still conform to the heritage aspects? Stucco. Do we have stucco, fascia through Victoria Park, or is brick the only molding that can be used?
I think we're getting into a detail that we shouldn't speculate on at this time.
That's why I was asking staff, Mr. Mayor, because we're really at a disadvantage here.
Yeah.
Either we cancel this or we look at some options. That's all we have at table. I think we have to explore whatever options we do have, because the only alternative is no.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that anyone in the room is in a position to comment on that. That's what I meant here tonight.
Well, if staff doesn't have that information at disposal, then that's the limitation we're playing with.
Mr. May is asked to speak.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the only point I would make is regardless of the information we might provide tonight, there is still a very specific process that would need to be followed. And so the question is, just as importantly, around the time that it would take. So we could give you an answer tonight, although we don't have that information because each proposal needs to be looked at within its context. But even if we gave you the answer tonight, it still has to follow the process.
Okay. So with that, there are no more questions. And is this a question, Councillor Ioannidis? Before, okay. So a motion is being put forward by Councillor Babich to go into caucus to seek legal advice. Is that correct? Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Singh. To go into caucus for legal advice. Those in favour? Opposed? It's carried unanimously, so we'll recess for... as we recess for a few moments to seek some legal advice on this matter. So we're back on the tender related to the washroom in Victoria Park. And I'll go back to the... are there any more questions? I've got 4 speakers, and these are comments, but I want to know if there are any more questions. We'll take those first, okay? Do you want to... Councillor Davey.
Thank you. If understanding that if we were to cut back on a lot of the heritage-related items, it would have to go back to Heritage Kitchener. Assuming that Heritage Kitchener did not approve the changes, I understand that it would come back to council, depending on the motion, it would come back to council and we could either choose to build it as it is or not build it at all. Is that?
Mr. Wilmer.
Sorry, just to clarify, is the question about to not build the building or about approving a heritage permit that's different from Heritage Kitchener's recommendation?
Actually, you can answer either or both, if you don't mind.
Okay, so in terms of the heritage permit, Heritage Kitchener makes recommendations and council makes the decision. So you could elect to make a decision that's different from Heritage Kitchener. In terms of the bigger question, council always has the option of electing not to proceed with a project. And we do this from time to time if we feel that there's minimal risk in just trying again in a year's time with the same or substantially similar project. In this case, though, it's the availability of the federal funding that puts a deadline on this, that we really can't afford to delay materially. We either go ahead with either no delay or short delay, or we say goodbye to that opportunity for federal funding.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I see nobody else asking questions. We're now going to go into to comments. Councillor Gazzola.
Okay, I'm going to comment on item 3.1, which really relates to the tender.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
We're doing both of them at the same time.
Okay. I want, my comments are that I can't support, at this point, I can't support this project in any way. When this first started out, I was amazed that it was going to cost $400,000 for washrooms, $400,000. Now we're looking at $565,000 for washrooms. I just can't get that in my mind as to what kind of washrooms they are. But the serious part is that that's 40% over it's a 40% overrun. We just can't deal with that. We have to go back to the drawing board and look at something differently. You know, maybe at one time there was talk of attaching these washrooms to the boathouses. Maybe we have to look at that. Whatever it is, we have to look, in my mind, at something different. Now, I appreciate that there's a $200,000 grant or sale item there in the winds. You know, unfortunately, sometimes we can't always afford to take advantages of the sales that come by. I know we often need things for our house, and there's some really great sales on, but if we end up having to spend 40% more than we expected to, we say, I'm sorry, but we can't take advantage of the sale. So that's the case that we have here. I think the only solution here is we have to go back to the drawing board and start over again. And then we don't have any legal problems with the tender issue and all of that. We have to live within our means. And you know, a 10% over budget, 15%, but when you get up to a 40% more than we expected to spend, we just can't go there. So I'll be voting against that recommendation, and I'll be voting against the tender. And I'd like a recorded vote on both of them.
Okay. Councillor Ioannidis.
I agree with Councillor Gazzola that we have to live within our means. And staff has pointed out that they have found funding for the additional cost. So that is living within our means. And to not accept this project to go further, as you want to put it in percentages, well, 200,000 is like 45% of the project. So we would lose 45% of the value if we don't go ahead with this project. So I'm willing to support the project to move forward. I don't like it that it's more, but at the end of the day, we're not the experts in how much the prices are going to be. It's just the way it is. And as far as scaling back heritage, I totally disagree with that. I think we have to maintain the heritage value. We hold private citizens to certain standards, and then when it comes to ourselves, we can't do it? No, I disagree. We have to hold ourselves to the same standard, and that's why I will disagree with that. And I'm all forward to moving this forward.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you.
I didn't say this earlier. You're capturing all of your comments now because I don't want to go around a second time on this.
It's unfortunate due to the process that my motion was not able to be read, because I think what's really important is that the fact that the public is viewing this today this is really connected in some ways, because we are part of this policy that we set in 1980s about a unionized masons only working on city municipal projects. I have a fear that some of the cost is such, and the opportunity to go out again for a public tender and it would be an open tender, could very possibly encourage us to have tenders from non-unionized bricklayers. Bill 73 is being read on Thursday. This could be a golden opportunity for us to actually save some money. The reality is that the $200,000 from the fund from the federal government really only comes out to about a $50,000 grant, because now we have to spend we're spending $150,000 more than we had initially planned. I mean, I could have gone to some of my acquaintances who deal with plumbing and heating and such, but I thought, that's going to be a moot point, because I know it's going to be declared that I don't understand what I'm talking about. I think that this building is sounding quite fancy for a public washroom. I understand the heritage components. I understand that there has been discussion, but I think that we had an opportunity here to go out and retender, keep many of the same specifications. We didn't need premium brick. We don't need some of the other features on that building. So in light of the fact that I can't move my motion forward, I will not be accepting this tender, nor the the additional report on page 3-3. Just a quick comment regarding the funding sources. That will be to the deficit, or the detriment, of the Legion, which is, this was the $65,000, from my understanding from Ms. Houston, was to replace the roof on the Legion. That's a historical building as well.
Just for those who may be watching, Councillor Fernandez made reference to her motion that she put forward earlier, and that was to retender. That can't accept that as a motion, because we have the motion to approve the tenders on the floor. So the only way, in order to deal with that motion, cannot come forward. A deferral motion or defeating the motion essentially accomplishes the same thing, but I just wanted to be clear on what that was about. Councillor Verbanovich.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I want to make a few points on this issue. And I think it's important to remember all of them as we're discussing it, because it is a complex one. I too, quite frankly, am shocked at the dollar figure that we're talking about, and I think what we need to do is, outside of today's discussion, have a conversation around how do we get better at estimating what our costs are going to be for these kinds of projects when the information comes forward to council at committee and we're making a decision about it. I think we need to be much closer in terms of those estimates before we go out to the tender process. So I think that's another conversation for another day, but one that needs to happen nonetheless. In terms of this particular issue, I think what's important to remember is, first of all, there's $200,000 at stake here from the federal government that's available through the CIIF fund. The longer we go on in the construction season, the more likely that some of this project won't be done, and we're going to jeopardize the funding. Or if we don't go ahead with this project, then we're going to jeopardize all of the funding. And I would suggest to everyone here that no matter how you cut it, we're not going to, if we jeopardize all of the funding, we're not going to be building this project for an estimated cost of $349,695. I don't see any scenario of how that would happen in terms of the estimated costs before us. I think secondly, we, as Councillor Ioannidis pointed out, need to remember that we put certain expectations on the public all the time around heritage. And it would be, quite frankly, hypocritical of us as a municipality to say, public, we put these expectations on you, but now when these same issues are being faced by us as a municipality, we're going to abandon those principles. I think that is, quite frankly, flawed, and I wouldn't want any part of that. Thirdly, I know that my colleague keeps bringing up the issue of masons, and that's making a big assumption there that the cost associated with unionized masons is always higher than the cost of non-unionized masons. That ends up being part of a tender process, and it may or may not be. But I think to use the bill and the fact that it's only going to second reading on Thursday as a way that somehow this is going to solve our problem, that's not the case. Second, there's still a long process between second reading and final reading and adoption of the bill. And so I think we need to keep that in mind. Finally, I want to remind Council that later tonight we're going to be dealing with the issue of the boathouse. And the reason that these bathrooms are being dealt with is that we know for the boathouse to be a viable operation, or that building to be a viable operation, it needed bathrooms that weren't part of that building. And so for us to now go in and abandon that, quite frankly, is going to add some, in my view, much more complicated discussion on that other issue when we deal with it later on tonight. So I will be supporting this, Mr. Mayor, but I do think one of the things we may want to consider is, and I would be prepared to move an amendment, I'm not sure if it's friendly or not, move an amendment that we reduce the budget for this project by $40,000, and that we direct staff to discuss with the, and I guess maybe I'll ask the question before I move this, direct staff to have discussions with the lowest bidder about where we could remove that and still keep the project true to its overall principles. So I'm wondering if staff can comment on that.
All right, just on that last point, negotiating with the lowest bidder for finding some savings in that amount. Who can speak to that? Ms. Houston.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, certainly we can go back to the lowest bidder and negotiate with them. My question, I guess, would be is what if we're not successful in the attempt to reduce it by $40,000 and still maintain the intent? Because if you look at the factors that are causing the increased cost, they're very specific, and without redoing the drawings, it would be very difficult to change those.
So you don't believe there's some places in terms of finishings and so on that we could still keep true to the tender and the process and still find some savings?
Not in the range of $40,000.
So what would be a reasonable figure?
I would be guessing.
Okay, I'll hold that for now, Mr. Mayor.
I'll come back to you before we deal with it if you want to amend that. Councillor Etherington.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm in a very difficult spot on this one. I'm on the Heritage Committee, and obviously the park is in my ward. Now, even though the existing washrooms at the boathouse will remain open through this year and into the spring. Visitors to the park still need public washrooms. We went through all of that and we established that. They need the washrooms at this end of the park. The public washrooms are also needed in order to add to the future success of the boathouse, as Councillor Vanovich just outlined, to the success of that music restaurant business venue in the future. Now, having said that, I'm disappointed at the current cost of the washrooms, and I'd like to see some way of reducing that cost. But I also know, as a member of that Heritage Committee, that members would never agree to downgrade that building and the look of that building. In fact, if you recall, we had an architect who's a member of that committee as a delegation before council, who was arguing that we were building a low-quality building and he wanted to see us upgrade the building. So I'm sure it wouldn't go very far at the Heritage Committee. I'm going to support the tender, and I too would like to find some way of trying to whittle down the cost of the eventual building.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Mayor Zer. I looked at the overage, and from my vantage, I'm not looking at it being, I guess Councillor Gazzola's figure was 40% over budget. We were going to pay $200,000 is what I agreed to, and this is 75% over what the City of Kitchener was going to pay. I can't vote in favor of that. I'm frustrated that the way the grants work is that we can do it as long as we're kind of impulsive. We can do it as long as you don't run into any hiccups. It's a little bit frustrating. I mean, I appreciate it's there in the first place, but at this point, I can't support it. I mean, $550,000 is, it's with the. I respect heritage, but it's a washroom. Like, can there not be a rule where washrooms are exempt from heritage that we can tuck it away? I mean, we're building a throne room. So at this point, I would love to see some way that we can possibly still leverage the funding and get, I wasn't even happy with $40,000. I want to see $100,000 come off of this, and I'm willing to see a less appealing building put in its place. But until that happens, I won't be supporting it.
Councillor Udesky.
Thank you. Boy, this is a struggle of a decision to make. I'm very, very disappointed in where this has led us to in terms of 40% over. That was my first shock when I calculated it, approximately 40%. And to go in that direction, I really didn't want to go and support the particular overspending on this, and not go that direction. Yet I look at the 5 criteria that staff have outlined in the report. They talk about a typical municipal building, but I mean, we knew right off the start it's going to be a washroom, so the plumbing component of it would already should have been a standard in terms of knowing what the figure would be. The high degree of building services, well, again, that's that component that should have been in there. Heritage, of course, it's in a heritage district, in the heritage area. It's got great strengths. We don't want just a shack and a Johnny on the spot that we have half the time there. So I think that should be taken into consideration, because when you think of the other washroom that's right by the pavilion and the water area there, I mean, that was built 100 years ago or so, and that's beautiful brick masonry, and it still looks great today. And it's only a John. Of course, the Victoria Park Postcard Club is in there as well. But anyways, the heritage component is important. Now, accessibility, well, I think you're caught by the legislation on that, so you're going to have to provide that. 20,000 is automatic. and the masonry work by union people, well, I think 25,000 could be right. I mean, you could probably get it cheaper, but that's a cost that has to be considered. So, having said all that, we're 150 over, but the key component of this whole thing, as I see it, was the federal funding, which is why we went with this whole project. That was 50% of the objective of 400,000. Now, if we forfeit that for whatever reason, because it gets turned down, or we don't maximize it in terms of getting the project completed by that time, if it does move forward, it's money lost, and it's a good proportion. So if we take what our contribution was 200 plus the 150, maybe we can downscale that. Our contribution is 350,000, or maybe less than that, if we can negotiate maybe some better deal with the contractor. However, you have to also keep in mind that, and where was I going on this in this particular thing? The contingency, that factor that was considered in this particular process was 16,000. Well, we're way above that, to keep that in mind. And if we do go with this, I'm assuming that 16,000 contingency will still stay there. I don't know. That hasn't been brought forward. Anyways, I am in a tough dilemma here, but I think that if we do not support this and it gets turned down, and it comes back a half a year later or whenever, I think the costs are going to be about the same. Maybe they'll be reduced by maybe $50,000 or whatever, because you still got to build it, and depending on what specs you'll have, I think you'll be further behind because you would have lost that $200,000. I mean, it's such a factor, and that's my dilemma, I think, and that's an important thing to consider.
Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you. And as said from previous comments, this is very difficult. Because the question is very clear. It's not that do we need a bathroom in Victoria Parks as a facility. That's quite clear. It's necessary. Viability for the boathouse is essential to having additional bathroom facilities near that. But the cost that's being related to this, saying just I'm disappointed to see this, would underscore how I feel when I saw this report. 40% or up to 40% over budget, it's mind-boggling. An average home in the city of Kitchener costs $230,000, and we're building a bathroom facility for $500,000. That's kind of difficult to justify to the taxpayer. It's difficult to go and say, you know what, we're increasing the scope of this project by 40% as a cost allocation to it, and that's just because, sorry, that's just how it works. I'm not saying I'm disappointed with staff, but I would like to revisit or review the process of the tendering, that when staff are aware, when the tendering process comes to an end, that it's significantly over budget, and there are other meetings prior to a council meeting that a tendering has to be approved. We had this opportunity that we could have come and visited this on September 9th in a committee meeting, and we would have had some more advanced time to assess this more appropriately, rather than on the 11th hour. That being said, the CIF funding that's associated to this, additional $200,000, and I think the other council members said this too, we're paying $150,000 more, but we're getting $200,000 from the higher orders of government. At the end of the day, if you say yes to this, we only got $50,000 extra. And one, I think, factor that's being missed at this horseshoe at this point is that it's not an all or nothing proposition. We've heard from staff that the time limits that are associated to this project, if we surpass that, we get less. So why don't we take a chance? We don't say no to the bathrooms in Victoria Park. We say, staff, go back, let's revisit the scope of this project, re-tender out, come close to the original assessment of $400,000, and even if you surpass the March 31st date or end of March date, if you get less after that, we may still end up being better off, and if you don't, I think we'll still be exactly where we are right now. So based on that, I don't think I can support the report as it's tabled, but I would encourage that if it's defeated, that council give direction that the scope of the project be revisited.
Before we move on, someone's cell phone continues to ring in this chamber. Please turn it off. Councillor Galloway, Seelock.
Yes, I just wanted to quickly give my comments. I'm not happy with the overage of money, but council set this as a priority, and we made it clear that it was one of our priorities. That's why we put it up for funding, and it's something that through the whole process of the boathouse that we went through and through the amount of money that we spent on Victoria Park last year to make it a better place, this was something that we set as a priority. And that we are able to find the funding within existing budgets to cover off this overage. Again, I'm not happy that there's more money being spent. One point that I don't think's been made yet is that there was public consultation on this, and the public looked at the different options and have chosen this is the best option and this is the best site. And so I think that that's important to remember. So to go out and redo what we've already done with the public, and one of them was to extend the washrooms at the boathouse building, has already been looked at. So I think it's important to remember that as we make our decisions tonight. Our other options is to continue to have porta potties or porta packs in the park. And I think from a heritage perspective, a sanitation perspective, it's better for us to look at a long-term solution. There's been a lot of spin on percentages and dollars with respect to this project tonight. And no matter what way you cut it, we're not going to end up with a washroom building for $350,000. We're just not. To cut $250,000 from this project is going to make it not viable. So regardless of if we go out and we lose the federal funding, we are not going to get a building for $350,000. I think our tenders show us that. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind, regardless of, we're not going to be able to reduce the scope enough to reduce it $200,000. I think it's just interesting around this table, we're constantly criticized about being anti-heritage. And I think it's interesting tonight to see the members of council who are willing to compromise heritage on this project. So I will be supporting the recommendations.
Okay, I have some comments, but Councillor Banovich, did you want to indicate what you're, I'm not going to take it yet, but indicate what amendment you are contemplating?
Sure, yeah, Mr. Mayor. I do think, because I am struggling with this, I think we do need to send a message around the fiscal restraint aspects of this. And so my amendment would be that we reduce the funding by $40,000 and direct staff to work with the lowest tender to remove items necessary. And I think that's up for staff to discuss with them in order to bring it in on budget. And I think what's important, Mr. Mayor, just in making that motion, because it hasn't been said, for the viewing public tonight, the Dakin construction tender is the lowest tender, and the range from that one to the highest one, there's $214,000 difference between the lowest tender of 564 and the highest tender of 788. So I think it's important to remember that the likelihood of seeing anything go lower is in a big way without substantive changes is pretty minuscule.
Okay, thank you. I will come back for that amendment in a moment. I'll just make some comments, if I may. There are a couple of comments that have been made, and I think I'd like to put a little bit of different perspective to them. We did not decide to build the washroom because there was a grant. It was quite the reverse. We came to a decision as a council, maybe not unanimously, but council did come to a decision that a washroom was needed and where we were going to put it. In terms of possibly moving it across the street and having it as an addition to the boathouse, we did go through that debate already. But even if we were to do that and reconsider it, the costs would be, I think about the only reduction in cost that you would have would be you wouldn't be able to have a skate change place. because I don't think you want to have little children walking across the roadway from the washroom attached to the boathouse to come over to the rink on the other side of the road. That was the change area, and the space for changing skates was added because it was right there with the rinks. We can rail against the problems that we have here, but it doesn't eliminate the need that we have. Like everyone else has said, I don't like the situation we're in, but the $200,000 would be lost if we decide not to do this. And when we come to doing the project, because we still need to do the project, the costs would be there in its fullest, to its fullest extent, and we would be bearing 100% of the costs. So it's not an easy comment to make. Well, it's an easy comment to make, but it's not truthful to say that we're getting $200,000, but it's $150,000. We're really getting $50,000. No, it's $200,000 that we would be giving up. The issue of the reallocation from the building maintenance from the Legion building, it's not a matter of that it is needed this year. It is not needed this year. Staff have made that determination. It can go for a number of years yet. So it is not leaving the Legion in any dire, the Legion building on Ontario Street, the old Legion building. It's not leaving it in any dire straits. It has been stated that already that, and I've just commented, that it's needed in any event. But it will certainly be needed as well, and I will be issuing or making a comment later on about the boathouse decision that happened this weekend. But we do need to have that in order to make sure that we have all of the facilities available in that part of the park. The issue of the masonry bill number 73, and I hope it does pass on Tuesday or whenever it is, 19th, I think, of this week. I hope it does, but it's only second reading, and it will take many months, if it does pass, to be finally put into place, and who knows what the effective date of it will be. One would hope it would be immediately, but we don't know that at this point in time. So for all of those reasons, I will support both the amendment and the main motion, and I would suggest that we wrap the staff report at which is on 3-1 of the Committee of the Whole, in with the motion related to the tender. So the tender report or motion would be that the additional funding be from the sources that are actually in the tender report. So it's not, it's already in that report, that those areas of funding be the source of funding for it. Okay, Councillor Rabanovich is moving that specifically, please.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I will move a reduction in funding of $40,000, and now I don't know if that's friendly to the mover. I forget who moved. I think it was Councillor Gazzola that moved all three.
No, Councillor Gazzola, I think seconded. Can you tell us who moved and seconded the tenders today? I did. Okay, Councillor Gazzola did.
Is that friendly, Councillor Gazzola? To reduce it by $40,000? If not, we'll just.
Well, you don't. You can support the amendment, but you don't. Make it friendly or not?
We can deal with it separately.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm reducing it by $40,000 with the account to be determined by staff, or do you?
You're directing staff to negotiate with the lowest bidder to reduce it by $40,000.
Right, and to reduce the $40,000 from those three accounts that are listed there.
Yes. Okay. And with the understanding that those three sources of funding are part of this motion as well. Okay, a recorded vote has been called for. You can now vote. I will announce it. It is lost on a tie vote, and therefore the tender is not approved, and we do not get washrooms. We are now left with a dilemma that we have to direct staff to deal with the issue. I beg your pardon? Okay. No, I'm not going to get into a debate on this. It is defeated, period. The obvious solution, obvious consequence of that is that staff will be required to review the situation because we do have a motion on record, and we're not going to go back on that motion unless it's a reconsideration, to have washrooms, additional washrooms erected in the park. That still stands. It's this tender only and the process of funding that has been defeated. And so staff will obviously have to come back. I would ask council to remember this day, though, when it does come back, because I'm sure that the cost will be significantly higher net cost for the city. So I don't think there is anything else to be done this evening. We've defeated the tender. Point of order, yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, just related to your last comment that it's defeated and there's nothing more that needs to be done according to that. Is that to say that staff will, do they have direction to look at the rescoping of the project and bring it back in next, I guess, committee meeting or council meeting, or does that direction need to be given?
Well, personally, I would say no. I would vote, let me put it differently. I would vote against rescoping it because I think we open ourselves up to a potential lawsuit. There has to be a change of a substantial change. We're not simply respecing this at this point in time. I'm not going to support anything that would potentially put us in a liable situation.
That's fine, and that's where I guess the challenge would come in. As I see this, that we defeated just the tendering, not that the project where council had given direction that bathrooms are needed for the Victoria Park facility. And I think that still stands. That's the point I made.
Right. That still is on the record.
Okay.
Yeah.
So staff will come back and bring another report.
They'll have to at some point in time, but I think that we've probably lost the window in which this will be done.
Well, and that's why, if the process allows it, I would like to move that staff be given direction to the next available date as soon as possible, depending on the resources that are available, that they relook at and rescope the project under the allowability of the tendering process, so that we are not under any legal liability also. And you're absolutely right that we can't just look at the aesthetics aspect of it. The entire project needs to be rescoped. And brought under in line to what the original budgeting was done for the project, and that direction needs to be given to staff, and a time frame related to that recommendation as well. We can't just leave it to staff to say bring it back to us when you can. I think we have to still leverage on the CIF funding that is still available. We haven't said we don't want the CIF funding, because CIF funding is still available even if we complete past the March end date. It's just that we would get less than if we go past that date. Am I wrong with that, or?
We don't know. So that's.
Well, I had heard from staff earlier that it's not an all or nothing proposition, that we would just get less.
Yes, I said, but we don't know specifically how that will work. That's all I'm suggesting. Mr. Chapman.
Through the chair, I think that's clear that it's not exactly certain right now how they'll administer it as of March 31st. The other aspect is that we had approval for a certain scope of work, and if it's a material change, we would have to have approval from the federal government, and we don't know whether or not they would withhold or grant that approval for a significant scope change.
I'm just thinking that we shouldn't hold our breath. I think we've lost that CIF grant. But so be it, but I don't think that that we should be building anything around that at this point in time. There are 3 speakers, 2 now, but I don't want to get into a long discussion on this because we have dealt with the tender. We still have the motion on the floor. Staff will have to regroup. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I'm somewhat surprised at your attitude. I think, I don't know if Councillor Singh has put forward, if we have to, I don't think we had to ask staff to go back and relook at this. I think that's understood. And I think if we need a resolution, I'm sure Councillor Singh's prepared to move it, and I would second it. But this isn't the first time in the history of this city that a tender's been turned down, and that's why the process is here. So I think, and it isn't the first time that we've had a project that's gone substantially over budget that we've had to go back and relook it. And so I think it's business as usual, and we should carry on.
That's exactly what I was saying. Well, I had said that the tender has been defeated. We still have on the books to erect a washroom, so it'll be back in staff's ballpark to come forward with an alternative. Councillor Fernandez.
I think that if we need direction, I think that the direction could be that at the next committee meeting, that we hear a report from staff on how this project can be rescoped and revisited and revamped so that we can make the most of the $200,000 that we had set in the budget and the hope that we can get as much as we can from CIIF funding. I think that Councillor Singh's comment that you can build a house for $250,000 really was a very clear statement to me. If you can build a house for $250,000, you could put as many bathrooms in there as you want. So I think that we need to direct staff, and if that's what I have to do, I will do that, and hopefully with the support of the rest of council that we can get some information by the next committee meeting, which would be September the 30th.
I will take a motion if really required, but I'm going to ask of Mr. Wilmer as CAO. Do you have sufficient direction at this point in time to revise the program?
Yes, we do.
Councillor Galloway, Seelock.
I guess I just don't understand what we're asking for in a revision, and because we approved this project as a priority of this council that was going to cost us $400,000, and then we applied for a grant, and we got it at 50%. So we got $200,000. If I understand correctly, the way the process has gone.
Yes.
So how now are we telling staff to go back and come in at less than $400,000 when that's what we were originally willing to pay, and we had a deal on the table with a tender for $350,000? So I just don't understand what we're asking to rescope where it's going to cost us less. So I guess that's where I'm confused in putting our resources towards staff when there's really no clear expectation of what scope change we're doing or what budget we're working with or anything like that.
I suppose the only thing that they could come back with was a completely downsized and completely different washroom than what is already been spec'd, and it will not have the same features or the same size. Okay, one more comment, Councillor Davey.
That's just a question, actually. That was my understanding. I just wanted clarification from staff if, and I know it's a shot in the dark, but if they still plan to engage the federal government, explain the situation, see if there can be an exception made.
Mr. Chapman?
Through you, Mayor Zare, we'll approach them immediately with two questions. One is whether or not they would entertain a revision potentially to the scope as it's been defined. And secondly, whether or not there's any flexibility with respect to the deadline. And if there isn't, whether they would prorate their support or eliminate their support as of March.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we'll move on the agenda. Okay, Councillor Galloway, Seelar.
Sorry, to belabor it. I know that we have defeated the current tender. Is there opportunity if a report comes back, whenever it's coming back, sorry, I can't remember, to reopen that, the ability to approve the tender, should there be, depending on what the staff report says. So say it comes back and no, there's no funding. Would we have the ability, obviously it would require a vote for reconsideration, which requires however much percent, but do we still have the ability to do that?
It would have to come back to a council meeting. This 30th is a committee meeting. It would have to come back to a council meeting, the next one being October the 6th, and it would take 2/3 for reconsideration. And I don't know how long, I'm looking to Mr. Gordon now, how long are tender values guaranteed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would have to double check that. I believe it's 60 days, but I'm going to look to see what that actually is, and I'll get back to council.
Perhaps you could send an email to us?
Yes.
Or it can be part of the report. Okay. Okay. Let's move on. We have the report of the committees, the Community and Infrastructure Services Committee. Councillor Ioannidis. Excuse me. Just a second. Did we not vote on the other two tenders? Okay, I'm sorry. I thought we had voted on the other two tenders. Those in favor of the other two tenders? Opposed? That's carried. Now, Councillor Ioannidis, can you press your button, please? Okay. And I don't think you need to read all of it.
Yeah, it's moved by myself and Councillor Galloway Seelock of the Community Infrastructure Service Committee that items number 1, that the Uniform Traffic Bylaw be amended to prohibit parking anytime on the north side of Hillcrest Lane. Item number 2, that an exemption of Chapter 450 of the noise complaint of the City of Kitchener Municipal Code be granted to the Van Quang Buddhist Association. 3, that the zone change application for Old Zeller Drive, Rockway Holdings Limited, and Grand River Conservation Authority for the purpose of removing a holding provision be approved. Item number 4, that the mayor and clerk be authorized to execute a lease agreement satisfactory to the city solicitor with the current property owner of 75 Ardell Place. Item number 5, that the Kitchener Municipal Code Chapter 902, backflow and cross-connection prevention, be amended as outlined. Item number 6, that the ION Rapid Transit Corridor streetscape design priorities identified in the Community Service Department report be endorsed.
Okay. And we'll take item number 6 separately. Councillor Singh has the conflict of interest on that. Councillor Davey.
Yeah, just a quick comment on item number 6. I raised the question in committee about the provision of wireless internet,
right.
And I was told by Mr. Thomas Schmidt that the RFP will include it as well as the vehicle agreement with Bombardier. So nothing's required to be added.
I think I got copied on that. I think it said it was the provision was being built in for it to be there. I don't think it said that it will be Wi-Fi, but the provision was built into the specs. Okay. We'll take number 6 first. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Items 1 through 5. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Finance and Corporate Services Committee, Councillor Davey.
Thank you. It's been moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Singh that the report of Finance and Corporate Services Committee be adopted. Item number 1 is the, I'm not going to go through all of it, but it's the AGCO agreement for the kitchen located at 21 Weber Street West. Item number 2 is also for the Alcohol and Gaming Commission for the Wren at 41 King Street West. Item number 3 is in accordance with the council policy that Mr. Brian Bennett be allowed to participate in the aftercare mission in Germany. Item number 4 is at $184,000 plus HST increase to the existing purchase order T12-069 with Network Sewer Water Main Limited, Cambridge, Ontario, referenced in the Finance and Corporate Services report FCS 12-185. Item number 5 is the application for the brownfield remediation by 55 Moorgate by Savick Homes be approved. And item number 6, that the Deputy CAO, Finance and Corporate Services Department be authorized to execute a contract extension with Ministry of Environment to the satisfaction of the City Solicitor for the 2014 RAIN program.
Okay. There are a few comments or questions. Councillor Gazzola.
I wanted to deal with item number 5 separately.
Okay. You want to speak to it? Now's the time.
Okay, now's the time. I actually had a question. I wanted to know if this is a downtown incentive, or does this incentive apply across the city?
I believe it's across the city, but who can speak for that? Mr. Regier.
Through you, Mayor Zaire, the Brownfield program is a citywide program.
And my second part of the question is, do we have any options here?
Through you, Mayor Zaire, not essentially. The proponent has met all of the criteria for our program. We have a program. This project is eligible for the program. Essentially, we've got a piece of land that has been sterile for many, many years and has been remediated under the understanding that this program would be available to help offset the remediation costs.
And so we're just rubber stamping this. We don't really have any options here.
I would suggest that we have a legal option, but we don't have a moral option.
Okay. I would, well, I've asked for it to be dealt with separately. I'm not going to support it, and I'd like to just give my reasons for it. Although it's a very good program, I don't have a problem with the program, and I support it. But from what I understand, in a situation like this, we're going to have a new assessment, but we don't get the benefits of that assessment for 10 years, basically. And to me, I think that's somewhat too good of a deal for this type of a situation. It's good to see these properties made active, but we give these grants without. Although we get involved with what costs are involved in remediating the site, we don't. If I'm not wrong, we don't really go into what kind of profits that the developer gets on this, because it's not really it's not a profit to the people who purchase dwellings there. It's really all goes to the developer. So I won't be supporting it. And I'd ask for a recorded vote. Thank you.
Councillor Fernandez.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to pull out number 4, please, and have that voted on separately, as well as number 6, to have that voted on separately as well.
Okay, you want to speak to them? Now's the time.
Yeah, number 4 was one that I had expressed concerns with regards to the Brom Street addition, additional monies that were going to that. Number 6, Councillor Singh spoke to that at committee with regards to wanting to defer it at the time, to have a better understanding of where the money, the $250,000+ was going to. I supported that as well at that time. I wanted to have a better understanding. So, I'd like to pull that out.
Okay. Councillor Singh.
Yes, just kind of clarification on Councillor Fernandez's last comment. It wasn't as a question to where the money is going. It's an extension to the RAIN program, but extending it to commercial properties where before it was for residential. But the questioning I had was, this was linked to some monies that we had received from higher orders of government as well. And my question was, did we have the ability to reallocate now that we have a surplus in that, or monies left still from the original program to either the tax stabilization fund or either back to the utility to offset any deficits? And at that point, staff weren't sure if this was exclusively linked to the RAIN program. Did we look into that further? I'm looking at staff.
Mr. Chapman.
If I recall correctly, part of that question related to whether or not we were obligated to meet the province's matching requirement, and were we required to use that surplus to bring our level of investment up to that $1 million level? And you wanted confirmation or clarification of that?
Well, the monies that we had received from, was it the feds or the province?
It was the $1 million from the province.
From the province was for the education process or the RAIN program really at that point.
Right. And
we had some additional monies left, which we were transferring it, we were extending the RAIN program to be for commercial, I guess, advantage as well. And my question at that point was, could we put it back to the utility to offset any deficits? But at that point, a question was raised that because we had this matching money from the province, that we were kind of restricted to what we could do with it. So staff at that point weren't sure. So do we have the capability?
With respect to the grant funding or with respect to our own surplus in the credit program?
In respect to our own surplus.
So the bottom line is, and Mr. Golan confirmed it after the meeting, that we are obligated to match, and at least to the level of $1 million, which is why the recommendation is here that we use a portion of our credit surplus to achieve our matching obligation. Beyond that, those funds are surplus, and they will be returned back to the Stormwater Enterprise to reduce the accumulated deficit, as you've commented on.
And that was for the residential RAIN program, though?
That was for the combined total of the credit program, the unused credit dollars that have not been spent over the past 2 years.
Okay. A little bit clear, call it on my capacity to understand. The surplus that we have at hand, do we have the ability to put it into tax stabilization or back into the utility? Or do we have to extend it?
A portion of that is required to meet our matching obligation, essentially what's in the report before you. The balance of it, which I believe amounts to about $400,000, is available to be returned to the stormwater utility to reduce the deficit or otherwise go to the stabilization account.
Thank you. And that was a clarification I was seeking at that point. And speaking to the earlier comments I had made in committee, that I think that we utilize the funding and our matching portion well with the educational program for the RAIN program for our residents or residential property-based users for that utility. I think if we have any surpluses, it should go back either to the tax stabilization fund or it should go back to the utility to offset any deficit or further increase the incentives for rebate, meaning that council and committee can utilize and take a look at seeing if the credit program could be enhanced further if you have some additional dollars still left. So,
but just to be clear, I think this recommendation here is having the extension so that in fact we can have time to spend the money up to that $1 million, or we lose it.
No, I think that's not the answer that I received.
We have the $1 million, but there's a risk that we had to match that. So the risk is there that we are not. It's like a bait and switch.
Mr. Mayor, I won't belabor the point much further. So unless I'm wrong, it was my understanding that we had utilized the funds for the RAIN program, which was specified to the residential properties. Yeah. But we did have some additional allocated monies left over in the end, and so staff thought it could be further utilized by extending it beyond 2013 to the commercial portion of it. That's correct. But and I was saying that it be amended if we have surpluses on our end, that after 2013 they go into either tax stabilization or back into the utility, rather than being extended to a commercial program. You may disagree with me.
Well, I'm thinking that we're running into the dangerous ground again of utilizing essentially monies from the province and not meeting our part of the commitment that we made to spend the $1 million for education program. That's part of the issue.
And that's why I was looking at staff to have that exact clarification, because I don't want to be in jeopardy of that either. So I didn't support it in committee. I won't support it now. If this is not, we don't have a clear handle of this, then I'll just, as I said, not support it and end the topic.
Okay. Mr. Chapman, do you want to go back on there? You had your microphone there. Okay. Councillor Yunetsky?
Well, thank you. I'm glad Councillor Fernandez raised the item number 4 to be voted on separately, and I'm not going to be supporting it based on the reasons I outlined last time about the increase in the cost. In regard to item number 5, the Brownfield site, for Mr. Councillor Gazzola's information, it is in my ward, and it is a benefit to move forward on this. The property has been vacant for 40 years, as it was an original landfill site, and it's one of the last to be built upon because of those concerns. So the only way it would have gone is by having these incentives that were available, which was discussed with staff and in negotiations. So it's just a matter of clarification. And I'll be supporting number 5.
Okay. Yeah, in fact, it would be bad faith on our part, I believe, to put out a program and then not authorize those people who have applied for it. And by the same token, in item number 4, let's be clear that this is the authorization of the payment, essentially, because the work is already completed, and so without making the payment, I used the phrase that the corporation could put a lien on our property because it's already been expended. Okay. We'll deal with items 1, 2, and 3. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Item number 4, which is the, well, we all know what it is, the $184,000. Recorded vote's been called for. Motion is carried. Item number 5. This is the Brownfield Remediation Program for 55 Moorgate Crescent. Recorded vote's been called for. That's unanimously approved. Councillor Fernandez reminded me earlier on about, because right now on the television it does not show who has voted which way. So on the previous vote related to the extending of the purchase order, everyone was in favor except for Councillors Gazzola, Yunetsky, and Fernandez. Item number 6. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. The Planning and Strategic Initiatives Committee, Councillor Verbanovich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I bring forward the recommendations from the committee moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Yunetsky. First of all, that report CSD 13-076 of the Kitchener Growth Management Strategy Monitoring Report be received, and further, that it be submitted to the Regional Municipality of Waterloo in fulfillment of our administrative agreement between the City and the region regarding delegated authority. Secondly, that zone change application ZC 13/05/B/ATP for Henry Walser Funeral Home Limited at 34 Becker Street for the purpose of changing the zoning from R5 to commercial residential CR2 with the special use provision in the proposed bylaw dated June 25th, attached to the report as Appendix A, be approved. And number 3, that the 2013 Leisure Facilities Master Plan update attached as Appendix 8 to Community Services Department report be received and consideration of the recommendations be referred to the departmental business planning process, and that the following vision statement included in the update be approved to help guide future development of leisure facilities and services in the City of Kitchener. Namely, Kitchener residents will have access to a diverse array of accessible leisure opportunities that encourage their active participation and support residents' health and well-being, strong and vibrant neighborhoods, and community capacity building. And further, that the following facilities be identified as future leisure priorities and referred to the 2014 Development Charges Background Study and Bylaw for consideration. Namely, in terms of indoor leisure facilities, the top 6 priorities: 1, Dune Pioneer Park Community Centre Addition; 2, New Southwest Community Centre; 3, Mill Courtland Community Centre Addition; 4, Southwest District Park Aquatics Facility; 5, the Rockway Centre; and 6, an indoor turf facility. And in terms of outdoor leisure facilities, the top 6 priorities are: 1, citywide trails; 2, Southwest District Parks sport fields; 3, multi-use sport fields; 4, Grand River Park; 5, neighborhood parks; and 6, soccer fields. And as I said, Mayor Zaire, it's been moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Netsky, and if I can just speak briefly to number 3.
Just before you do that, I had raised at the committee a possible amendment to that, and I'm wondering if it could be friendly. And this had to do with trails. Even though it is on the list that you've just read in the operative part of the resolution, I noticed that there was no specific, one of the multitude of recommendations that we had, there was nothing about trails specifically. So staff have suggested the following wording: that the city actively pursue the implementation of both the Parks Strategic Plan of 2010 and the Multi-Use Pathways and Trails Master Plan 2012, as trails and parks are highly valued by the community. It's just inserting that phrase so that it's clear that regarding trails, even though it is already on the outdoor leisure facility list.
Okay, that's fine. That would be friendly. So if I can just briefly speak to this, Mr. Mayor, I want to acknowledge that the Leisure Facilities Master Plan has been a huge piece of work by our staff with extensive community consultation in order to come up with the priorities that are before us. Obviously, the list of priorities exceed the dollars that are available presently, and that's why it's being referred to the Development Charges Background Study, the department's business plans, and ultimately our future capital budget processes to look how these items will be received or will be dealt with. I think the other point that's important to remember in looking at this, well, these are the priorities as they have been identified through the process. As time goes on and as the Development Charges Bylaw comes to fruition, and as also capital budgets are looked at, and as well as things like sponsorship opportunities, the specific order that's listed here may change in the future, and that obviously is something that would come back to Council. But I think what's important here is, in particular with the 2 number 1 priorities, they really are long-standing identified priorities of this Council, one being the addition to the Dune Pioneer Park Community Centre from an indoor perspective, as we know that that's an area that's seen significant growth in the city. Secondly, on the outdoor leisure facilities side, trails. We know that trails have been identified by our residents continually as a big priority, have been identified by this Council as a big priority, and so I'm not surprised to see it come through this study and the public process as a number 1 priority. I think the other thing that this report recognizes is that we are seeing significant growth in the Southwest, and that we need to, in the full scope of time, begin putting facilities in those neighborhoods to support the people that are living in the southwest quadrant of our city.
Councillor Fernandez.
Yes, I wanted to separate number 2.
Okay.
And I wanted to make an amendment to number 3, if I can.
Okay, what is the amendment before?
Yeah, in meeting with staff this afternoon and recognizing that number 2 and number 3 in our indoor leisure facilities could be switched around, given that DC charges for the development of the south area in Ward 5 still has a lot of time to grow yet. And Mill Cortland Community Centre has been on the capital forecast for a number of years. They are really growing out of the facility they have already. I think I'd like to see that swapped around. I know that staff indicated that truly that could happen anyways, sort of organically, depending on what our DC development charges, zoning, no, not our zoning, sorry, development charges bylaw comes out with. But I think it's important now to start moving that forward. That's an existing neighborhood that has a long-time neighborhood that is really see that their community centre is really expanding. Just wanted to speak very quickly on the trails. Certainly I think it's very important that we recognize that we are getting slowly amazing trails in a number of areas, but there's still an awful lot of work to be done. Having recently cycled on the Walter Bean Trail, I see that we could sure dump a fair bit of money into there. It's really in appalling condition. So I was really happy to see that we've got those outdoor facilities identified as top priority.
Correct me if I'm wrong, to staff, I guess it would be Mr. May. I think you made the comment at committee, did you not, that while they are listed 1 through 6, they are not necessarily going to actually function that way, depending on the funding as it comes through the budget, so that it wasn't one wasn't being penalized over another. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I think my point was that through a greater focus on things like partnerships, some of the items listed lower down, and I think the best example is the Rockway Center. Should we be successful in securing a private sector partner, that could move, it could be rebuilt sooner than, frankly, any of the items on the list. So this is the preferred order of priority after staff have evaluated against a number of criteria. If we were simply left alone just with the DC funding available, however, as Council will recall, there's a significant focus on finding partners that will help us move these things forward quicker.
Okay. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Well, obviously I can't let the comments that have been made go without returning comment on behalf of the residents of Ward 5 and everyone in the Southwest End. I appreciate the work that staff have put into this and into prioritizing the vast amount of facilities that we could have, both indoor and outdoor, within the city. I think it's important to remember with the Williamsburg Community Centre now, we're currently paying money to lease a space, and that money, if we can have a community centre sooner than later, can go towards the capital costs as opposed to going towards a lease. So I think that's something that's important to remember when we're looking at priorities. The Williamsburg Community Centre has also outgrown their facility in less than 5 years. They have a very, very small space, so I think it's important to continue to work on solutions, and I know that staff are working on partnerships already with that. So I ask that we keep the priorities the same, not trying to diminish the need in the Mill Cortland Community Centre addition either. I understand it's needed there, but that a lot of work's gone into this and that we keep the priorities as is.
Councillor Yunetsky.
Thank you. In regard to this item number 3 that's before us, I can appreciate some of the comments that have been made by various councillors on priority lists and comment by staff on the sponsorship. I do note that I think when we look at all the items that we have there before us of the 6, Rockway Center, I knew we had a huge contingency back earlier this year in terms of how we're going to deal with the the property in terms of redeveloping it totally or partially or whatever. And I know we're looking at the sponsorship as one of the options things, but there's absolutely nothing in the budget that was placed in there only because this item has just come up, whereby the other ones, whether it's the Southwest District or Dune Pioneer Park Community, they're in a budget for a few years down the line, and eventually we'll move forward, where Rockwood really didn't have anything. So I really would like to see Rockwood to be moved forward up to maybe the third spot on that. But I guess from staff's comments, the sponsorship, would that only pertain to Rockaway, or are you talking about any of the facilities additions that could take place?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we will be looking at partnerships for a number of these facilities, and so it's not just Rockaway. Things like the indoor turf facilities, or even some of the other facilities on the list, like the additions. What I would say is that the direction that staff has right now in terms of the Rockaway Center is that we engage a private sector partner, and that our funding requirements for that project will be quite limited. There is some existing capital within maintenance accounts for the current facility that might be utilized, and there's certainly the value of the land. But beyond that, it was Council's direction that the bulk of that redevelopment would be funded through that partnership.
Okay, appreciate that. Okay, I'll leave it as that.
Councillor Urbanovich?
Sorry, I'm fine, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Fernandez?
I just wanted to know if I needed to make a motion with regard to number 3.
Yes, you would have to make a specific motion.
Okay. So then my motion would be that to change around priority number 2 and priority number 3 to swap them around, so that priority number 2 would now be the Mill Cortland Community Center addition, and priority number 3, which would be the new Southwest Community Center, would be number 3, which would fall in line with the Southwest District Park Aquatic Facility. I see that in combining those two together, there may be a good opportunity to build both of those simultaneously once we have the proper DC funding. So that was part of my rationale for moving that
I was distracted, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
You're moving
I'm
Mill
moving,
Cortland to number 2.
That's right. And Southwest Community Center down to number 3. So just swapping the two around.
Okay, all right. No, I appreciate that. Councillor Galloway-Sealock, you were trying to catch my attention.
No, I just wanted to respond to that the thought of an aquatic center and a community center going together is nice, but we've already established the Rosenberg plan, where the community center is much closer to Bleems and Fisher-Hallman Road, whereas the aquatics facility would be going at Huron and Fisher-Hallman Road, which has already been established through the Rosenberg secondary plan. So if that's the rationale behind it, I say that that's already been established in some of the planning works that we've done.
Okay. Councillor Urbanovich.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I will be speaking against the change. I think it becomes very risky when we start taking a piece of work that's been through an extensive process that's involved input from professionals that we've hired, that's involved extensive community consultation, and that's involved work by our staff to prioritize things specifically as they relate to the development charges bylaw and the work that needs to be done on that. And so I think, it's clear that this, after all of that input and consideration, is what made most sense for the development charges bylaw. We've heard from our staff, and we know from past practice that there will be extensive opportunities along the way to consider a number of other factors in terms of what the actual implementation order of these items will be. The reality is something like the Mill Cortland Community Center addition is a much lower cost. And when you consider how much of that is development charge related versus how much is going to have to come from capital from current and so on, and whether there are any sponsorship opportunities and so on, it very likely could potentially even become number 1 going forward. Those are factors that staff are going to consider, as the recommendation states, where they're going to build it into their business planning processes, and they're going to build it into also, obviously, the capital budget plan going forward. So I think it's important that we stay true to the process. We leave this in place as it is, and we let those other things unfold, and council will have an opportunity each and every time when those reports come back to consider reprioritizing.
Councillor Ioannidis.
I agree with Councillor Verbanovich. I think there's been a long process with this and a lot of discussion involved in this, and to tinker with the list now, it's just, I think we're grasping at hairs here, and I really don't want to play in the perception as well. If we switch Mill Cortland from a central neighborhood, taking away from the suburbs, I don't want to play with that perception. So I think the way it stands is something that I think is the way that which we be going.
Okay, there's a motion to switch numbers 2 and 3 for the indoor leisure facilities. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Yunetsky. We're going to deal with the amendment first. So, and we'll deal with number 3, obviously, since we're on that. So, dealing with the amendment only, this is to switch 2 and 3. Recorded vote's been asked for. This is the switch. This is just the switch, just the amendment. Okay, that is defeated. Again, just announcing the result of that. It was voting for that change were Councillors Gazzola, Yunetsky, and Fernandez. The main motion now, as is printed. Recorded vote's been called for. And that is passed unanimously. Okay, we'll now go back to number 1. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And number 2, this is the zone change for the Henry Walser Funeral Home. Those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. Heritage Kitchener, Councillor Etherington.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Verbanovich. 2 items from Heritage Kitchener that, pursuant to Section 42 of the Ontario Heritage Act, Heritage Permit Application HPA 2013 V016, be approved to permit the demolition of the existing single detached dwelling and the construction of a new single detached dwelling on the property municipally addressed as 1209 Dune Village Road, in accordance with the supporting information submitted with the application and subject to the following condition: that the final building permit drawings be reviewed and heritage clearance provided by heritage planning staff prior to the issuance of a building permit. And number 2, that pursuant to Section 33 of the Ontario Heritage Act, Heritage Permit Application HPA 2013 1V020 be approved to permit the installation of a new front door on the property municipally addressed as 379 Glasgow Street, in accordance with the supporting information submitted with the application.
Councillor Fernandez.
Yeah, I just have a quick question with regards to 1209 Dune Village Road. It's in my ward, and my understanding is that this site sits on a GRCA floodplain. So my question would be, which would come first, the demolition permit or the permit by GRCA to allow another development to occur on that site?
Mr. Wilmer, former planner.
Hopefully I still have some of my knowledge retained. Essentially, this would be the owner's risk. If they choose to demolish before they have any GRC permits, we would honor that and issue the demolition permit. Logically, I would assume they would assure themselves that the GRCA permit is available before they undertake that. But that would be the owner's choice.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. It's the end of the business. Any unfinished business? New business. I'm just going to read a statement for the record of this evening. And this has to do with the boathouse in Victoria Park. And some of this, of course, is factual. Well, it's all factual, but it's also been known and reported in the media already. But just for the record, as of noon today, the operator of the boathouse was still in arrears and not in compliance with the lease and license agreement. As a result, the lease is now terminated and the facility is again under city control. The city is committed to the boathouse being an important cultural venue for live music, and staff will immediately begin developing a request for proposals for a restaurant and live music business in the facility. And I would like to emphasize that we are committed to doing that. There is more specific and further information being released this evening in a statement from our communications department, and more detail can be received there, but that will also include the timelines regarding the request for proposal process that will be done as quickly as possible. Now, Councillor Ioannidis, you have a notice of motion. I'm still on new business. Okay. Okay, Councillor Ioannidis.
Yeah, I would like to move a motion. Whereas the City of Kitchener established a natural area management program in 2002 through Council Policy I-955, and whereas official principle number 12 of the 2010 Park Master Plan sets out that the City of Kitchener is committed to protecting the natural environment through greening and naturalization initiatives and policies, and whereas the city's efficient and effective government document contains the strategic direction to maximize value through cost-effective service delivery, and whereas the benefits of a more aggressive naturalization identification policy could include increased naturalized and green areas, reduced burden on maintenance staff, and a potential reduction in costs to taxpayers. Therefore, be it resolved that Council Policy I-955 Natural Management Program be amended to increase the capacity for city staff and the community to identify areas that could potentially be naturalized. Can I speak to my motion?
Yes. Is there a seconder for this? Councillor Singh. Go ahead, Councillor Ioannidis.
One of the goals as a councillor and as council is to be physically responsible and to be good stewards to the environment, which I know the city's already taken as a leader in this, and this aligns well with some of our policies. This motion will take the step one further. I would like to see areas that are concurrently being maintained by the city become naturalized so that the city staff can concentrate and be more efficient in areas that matter more to the public. Staff can produce a list of areas that can be naturalized further, but it would need to be supported by the community. In addition, I would like to see a similar program as to our cul-de-sac program, whereas residents can take responsibility for the maintenance of these areas using standards that are environmentally friendly. I think those areas that the community do not support as naturalized areas could be maintained by residents or other areas of turf where the residents could take over, only if it makes sense. As an example, over the summer I've received inquiries as to why the city does not take care of their weeds, and that the weeds on city property are spawning more weeds on their own properties. Many have expressed the desire to maintain those properties on their own. And I see no problem with that, as long as they are maintaining the properties, the turf, with an environmentally friendly techniques. So overall, The motion aligns perfectly with our current policies, and it creates a sense of civic pride for our residents. Staff can iron out the details of the motion, which, as long as it makes operational sense in their minds.
Okay, Councillor Davey, on this point?
On this point, yes, on this motion. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm prepared to support it, but I guess you answered the question sort of at the end there that I had, and that was, how would we go about engaging the public? Because I know there are set areas where there would be some, I guess basically there'd have to be some sort of survey or something, or is that all to be determined at some point? There's there, sorry.
Sorry. Who's wanting to speak?
I'll keep it.
Okay. Councillor Reyna.
I would let staff determine whatever the best approach is, because they're the ones that know how to make it that more efficient than myself.
Okay, so the intention then would be that if this motion passes, then staff would come back with the suggestions on how they would carry it out.
I don't think we need to tell them how the details are. They're educated, they're in that process. They know how to make this system efficient.
I agree. I think I would request that staff does come back though, because I do have, I'm just thinking of for example, there's one contentious area in my area where there are a lot of folks that complain. It could be totally naturalized because there's a community trail beside it, but I get complaints several times a year that we haven't been out to maintain it. So there should be there should be some sort of consultation around it to see if the neighbors are in favor of it. So I would ask only that staff report back before taking any unilateral action. That was my comment.
Okay, I think a report regarding implementation would probably be in order, regardless of, not to get into the weeds, but probably would be in order. Councillor Singh.
Yes, I think this is a good step forward to something that will further mature and evolve with additional, on-look by staff. But I think this is a great reprioritization of, adding some efficiencies to our operations department. And we heard this early on today and through audit committee. I think this is a great process with which that we can engage our residents, give them more control of the environment that they live in, and work with them as partners. So I would be very supportive of this.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. I just have a few questions, or rather concerns maybe about this, because I think that residents sometimes struggle with the difference between a naturalized area and an area that's just gone to weeds and thistles, and I had heard a number of complaints about that this year, and I do recollect Councillor Ioannidis being very concerned about the region not cutting in certain areas. So I'm wondering how this fits in with that. So I would be pleased to see a bit more information coming from staff with regards to how we are going to ensure that residents are going to take care of this. I mean, we may have residents today that live in that area that are happy to have a naturalized area, but a year or 2 or 3 from now, we may have citizens who move beside that area and say, oh, this is just a big, huge weed patch. What are you talking about? Why is the city not taking responsibility? So that would be one area I think we need to understand. We also need to understand what kind of cost savings this would be. I think it's true we won't see the large mowers going out to certain areas as they naturalize, but I think there also should be, or could be, a program where we use, and I know that Ottawa has done this in a number of areas where they use wildflowers, and it's just a matter of scattering or spreading the seeds, and within a couple of years it's well-established wildflowers that continually come back. And I've seen that along the Wards Pond trail, where we did have a consultant do that, but now those wildflowers continue to grow and spread. The other concern I have is how we're going to deal with complaints, and I think that that's really important, because there is a distinct difference between naturalized areas and areas that are left to grow and left over to just turn into weeds. Some of these areas may already be starting to naturalize out on their own, and we maybe haven't got the time, or we haven't been able to get out to them quite as often as we would like to. So I think that there's some merit to doing this. I just think that there may be a few obstacles or a few hurdles that might be better reported back to council on how we'll be able to accomplish this. I think that the other component to this that I really like is the idea of residents taking over cul-de-sacs. I think there are a lot of cul-de-sacs that have become very well done and very well taken care of, and I think it wouldn't matter who lived there once it's established with a variety of shrubs and trees. The pride in the neighborhood continues to take care of that very well. So I just want to make sure that we really have some very clear understanding about how this will be carried out both by staff and by council and by communications and education.
Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that. I'm not clear as to what is being recommended here, and in its present situation, I will not be supporting it. There are a lot of these things that are already in play. This whole idea of residents looking after cul-de-sacs is already in play, and there are many areas in the city where they do that, and where they have changed it around and put it into types of environment that don't require as much looking after. So in many ways, I look upon this as a way of cutting cost and as a really somewhat of a loss of a pride in our community. I think our community, our region, our province has changed considerably over the years. It started out with the province not caring what the side of the roads look like, and it looks terrible. I guess you call that naturalized, but there are a lot of older people that think it's we're just cutting back. It was in this very chambers not too many months ago that this whole horseshoe was up in arms with the region, who did exactly this. They were looking at ways of cutting costs and said, we're only going to cut twice a year. It's going to be natural the rest of the time. So, I won't support this today. I trust that this will generate a report coming back from staff, and I will look at it again when I see that report.
I'll come back to you at the close. Okay. Councillor Yanetsky.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm rather puzzled as to where we're going with this. I mean, we already got, according to the first statement, a natural area management program. It's been around for already more than 10 years. And we also have the Parks Master Plan that outlined its principles protecting the natural environment. And I'm totally supportive of all this. And we've been already doing it for 10 years. To aggressively do it, well, you can only go so far. And staff have already done an excellent job in trying to provide naturalization and bring this forward. In fact, it's even happening in my ward as they extend the Henry Sturm Greenway. So to duplicate this, as I would see it, seems to be a waste of time and having additional staff resources to provide some more direction when it's already outlined in the reports. In fact, Statement 3, it's aligned already with the strategic plan that's before us and that we are following. So it seems to be a duplication of going this way, and I'm not going to prepare to support it.
Councillor Ioannidis, you want to finish off?
Yeah. I'm not surprised some of the comments that have been around the horseshoe. And I guess, one, to clarify, this is a step taking one step forward. This is not duplicating anything. The cul-de-sac program is already implemented. So what I'm talking about here is certain patches of fields behind houses that are just seas of grass that may make sense only if the community wants it. So if the community doesn't want it, we don't have to put in a naturalization area. Secondly, I ain't talking about our roadways or the side pathway. I'm talking about parks. So those are the areas that I'm talking about. I'm not, nowhere near am I even talking about boulevards or anything like that.
Okay, so do you want to include in there that that this is changing a policy? So do you want to also add to this that a process of implementation be presented to council?
Sure, it can be presented to council as well. I definitely can.
Sorry, I didn't turn you back on. Okay,
Sure,
go ahead.
sure, it can be presented to council. Again, I'm not a horticulturist or an arborist to decide what types of wildflowers or anything goes in there. That's staff expertise. So
No, I was thinking in the questions that Councillor Davey was raising and so on. I think the probably
sure,
needs
I'm
be
willing to
some,
put that in. Yeah.
Okay. All right. The motion is on the floor then with that amendment. Recorded vote's been called for. Give me a vote. The motion is carried. The opposition is Councillor Gazzola and Councillor Yanetsky. Okay. I have nothing further to report on Regional Council. There's a lot happening, except to say that there's a lot happening on the ION, and you should now be receiving either a hard copy or a link to the monthly report that's coming out. And now we will go to questions and answers. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I have a question, but I want to make a comment before that leads into my question. We have a process here at council where items are dealt with in committee on a week basis, and then within another week, or perhaps in some cases 2 weeks, they're ratified by council. So we do have an opportunity to think about issues that we've dealt with and have an opportunity to do more work, research on those topics, also to hear from our constituents before a final vote comes forward on a council night. Now, from time to time, at these committee meetings are followed by special council meetings. And from time to time, there are issues that, because of timing and whatever, need to be dealt with right away. And I can appreciate that, the necessity for those things. But it seems to me more and more often there are items that are slipping through and we're dealing with them immediately and not giving us an opportunity for a week reprise to think about what we're dealing with and to get comments from our constituents and whatever. Last week was another example. Unfortunately, I was unable to be here. It dealt with the removal of the Margaret Street Bridge. And the question I asked, what was the necessity to deal with that immediately at that special council meeting without leaving it for a week to be dealt with and ratified tonight? There are a number of questions that I would have liked to have asked and would have liked to have had the opportunity that don't happen when we deal with these things so quickly. And what was the necessity in this case? We've been without a bridge for many months, and going down the path, we're going to be without a bridge for many months ahead. That 1 week here, I don't see would have made that much difference. So can someone answer to me why we didn't get an opportunity, why it was dealt with immediately?
I can perhaps add some light to it. I don't know if any staff wish to add to it or not. it all revolves around it was clear that the options to, first of all, either remove it or make a repair, in my mind, and I think in obviously the rest of council's mind, was to remove it. So that was the question I believe that you're raising is the positioning of it and then giving it ratification immediately on the same day. So I take it in that particular case, you're not talking about whether we made the right decision or not, but just the timing. Is that correct?
Well, it is the timing, but even if that's the decision, there are questions that I think needed to be asked that haven't been asked.
Well, I think that, in fact, the kinds of questions that needed to be asked were actually asked and discussed last week.
Well,
and regrettably, I mean, you weren't there. I'm not going to be here at upcoming meetings, and I have to accept what the rest of council does when I get back.
Well,
I mean, that's the way council works.
I'm not saying I'm not accepting it. I read the minutes, and I really question the necessity to have dealt with it immediately. I'll leave that with you. It seems to be happening more and more often. I do have. I perhaps think that if we'd have looked at it a little closer, we're saying that we're going to have to spend $6 million, and we're going to have to. And if it comes in at $6 million, if it comes in at some of the figures that we've been dealing with tonight, we could be dealing with a much higher figure. And I felt that report that came to council last week should have given some indication of what kind of projects are going to have to be postponed, delayed, or done away with to provide that $6-7 million figure. And I think that should have been there. But I do have one question that I would like to ask about it, and that deals with the fact that we've made a decision here that I've oft wondered about, to tear the bridge down. When we go through the tearing down process, are we going to be dealing with try to get some additional supporting evidence as to where the bridge was weak? I mean, I think we owe this. One of the decisions made in this case was that there are other bridges in this country, and one has fallen down. Well, we have a situation here that we need, as we're going through the process, to see where the weakness was. Are we going to get some information about this alleged weakness when we have the bridge torn down? Can someone answer that for me?
Ms. Houston?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think that's something we'll have to bring back for council as additional information. It may add to the time in terms of getting the bridge down, but I'd like an engineer to speak to that particular point.
Fair enough. Thank you. I have a second question.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, some months ago, there was an unfortunate fire and explosion in our city, after which we went through and did spend additional funds to have equipment tested and whatnot. And I've asked for a report, and I've never seen anything as to what was the result of that. How many properties did we look at, and what was the final cost to the city of looking at that? If that's available, can it be?
Ms. Houston?
That is, in fact, coming forward on September the 30th as a report to council.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks very much. I've been watching in the last number of months since the June 17th committee meeting and the June 24th committee with interest how our trail gates have been opened. I was interviewed by the Kitchener Citizen, and I was quite taken aback when I read that our Jim Whitmer, who is our director of operations, was quoted as saying that they're considering rumble strips to alert cyclists about upcoming stop signs. So when I went back to the minutes of the meeting, both the Community Services as well as council, there was no direction by council at that time to use rumble strips. As a matter of fact, the only thing that we talked about was that warning signs would be brought forward. Councillor Urbanovic had said that warning signs could be in place before opening the trail gates. Well, we are sitting now 3 months, almost, to the day of the committee meeting, and a week short of 3 months, the council meeting, and we still don't have all the gates open. One of the concerns I continue to hear from cyclists, and that I've experienced myself, is that we are not even coming close on some of these gate openings to the 1.8 meter opening that has already been identified in the Ontario Traffic Manual, Book 18, bike facilities. I really am getting concerned that winter will be upon us in no time at all. And of course, the Iron Horse Trail gates are all open, but there are a number of gates through the community, one on Walter Bean Trail that sits at the bottom of a hill and is definitely not of that 1.8 width. So I really would like to be, I would like to know what the, when we're going to see these trail gates open. I apologize, I said 1.8, it's 1.5 meters, according to the city's cycling master plan and also by Book 18. So I really, I'm getting frustrated as a cyclist. I know a number of cyclists are getting frustrated. Before we see another incident happen on one of our trails, I do think that this is really important that we get on. This was a council directive in June, and we're still waiting to see all these trail gates open. When are we going to see them open?
Ms. Houston.
If I recall correctly, I believe the resolution was specifically for Iron Horse Trail, in that council felt that those could be opened immediately without implementing any other features and so on, that the rest was not part of the scope in terms of the cost, I don't believe, of putting the signs in. But we can certainly report back on when the rest of the gates can be opened.
With all due respect, I mean, Mayor Zaire is presently looking at the committee minutes and the council minutes, and I know that there was discussion about the Iron Horse Trail, but there is a wide variety of standards at this time. We've got standards where there are no gates, that we've got standards where there are gates that are halfway through an opening, that we've got gates that are half open. We've got bollards in some areas. I mean, this is getting confusing for the public. They're not sure what they're going to encounter. If they decide to go on a long trail ride or a road trail ride, they're not sure what they're going to encounter. And if they've got one of the child carriages behind them, they may be in a dangerous situation.
Yeah, I'm doing a quick read, obviously, here. It was that Clause 14 was approved as amended. The amendment, I believe, was related to the costs.
And the warning signs.
And, yeah, and the warning signs, that's correct. I'd take a clearer read of it, to be honest, to be absolutely certain. I think it's worthwhile for us to go back and look very specifically at all of the wording of both the committee minutes and the council meeting to ensure that what is being done is as was requested by council. I don't think we're going to debate that tonight, but I think you raised the question, and so it deserves an answer.
Okay, and I appreciate that. And I mean, I know that I've seen Councillor Gazzola take a ride with his grandchildren, and I know that it has also become an obstacle for them. When you have a large group going through, trying to get through those gates, some people can be stuck on the street, okay, and some people can stuck on the trails.
I don't want to debate it tonight. We've raised the question. We'll get an answer for you. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I would like to speak to the topic.
I don't want to debate whether it's for or against, though.
I'm not going to debate it. I just want to support what Councillor Fernandez is saying. I was I'm totally confused. I was of the understanding that all the gates were to be open, and it's really confusing because half the gates are open, half aren't. And I would like to ask Councillor Fernandez to make a motion tonight that all the gates be opened.
No, I think we don't know exactly what, I mean, there's interpretation of a minute, and unless we all had the minutes around us and went through the entire debate again tonight, we might be doing something which we didn't do. My recollection actually was that the Iron Gate, Iron Horse Trail gates be opened immediately, and that they start moving on the others as they can. But there were some issues that had to be dealt with. So I don't agree that, but I haven't read it all, I don't agree that we had said all gates are going to be open right away. So I think that the best we can do tonight is to go back and have a review of those minutes and the discussion, because they are narrative minutes. They're not even just parliamentary minutes, so we can have the benefit of following all that through.
In this day and age of technology, we have that information at our fingertips. We should be able to make a decision now without having to wait 2 or 3 weeks, because in 2 or 3 weeks the snow's going to start to fly.
Get your woolies out if that's going to be the case. No, I'm not going to. I mean, if you can overrule me with challenge the chair, but I'm not going to take a motion on that tonight because we don't have the information here, and it would be debating the same issue we did before. Pardon me?
Mr. Mayor, I mean, we would need a notice of motion anyway.
Yes, it would.
And we would have to, or we would have to waive motion.
Yeah. So I'm not going to entertain that this evening. But I am going to ask staff to come back with a review of those minutes, both council and committee. Okay, any further questions, answers? Okay, it's been moved by Councillor Singh, seconded by Councillor Yanetsky, that the bylaws be given first reading, but I believe there are a couple of, 4 additional bylaws.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, there are 4 late starter bylaws, the first of which is the zone change concerning 34 Becker Street. The second is the zone change concerning Old Cellar Drive. Thirdly is establish and lay out part of Gravel Ridge Trail. And lastly, establish and lay out part of Thomas Slee Drive.
Okay. Those in favour? Opposed? That's carried. And it's moved by Councillor Brabanovic. The Council resolve itself into Committee of the Whole. All in favour? Opposed? That's carried.
Thank you. The bylaws have been moved. All those in favour? Opposed? That's carried. Item number 2, somebody want to move it? Moved by Councillor Ioannidis. All those in favour? Opposed? That too is carried. Next, item number 4, the encroachment agreements. Are you moving that, Councillor Ioannidis? Okay, they've been moved. Any questions? Not, I have a question if I can ask. The wording right now seems to be very broad because it talks about indemnifying related to LRT-related infrastructure, including video cameras on lands owned by the City of Kitchener. The report makes it sound like it's primarily around video cameras, but because the wording is so broad to say all LRT-related infrastructure, I'm not sure I'm prepared to just give a broad, personally anyway, a broad discretion to staff to approve all these without them coming to council.
By way of background, I can tell you that Council has previously passed a resolution authorizing I think it's bus benches, the overhang signage, and things related to the GRT buses currently. And it could be anywhere in the city that it's needed to make alterations subject to staff's review. This is taking it to another level. You're correct, dealing with the LRT, and it's because as the LRT project unfolds, we're discovering there's various things that the region's asking for, and this was a way to sort of keep it moving and expedite the execution of the agreements, but everything would be subject to staff's review and determining that things were appropriate. What triggered this particular report was indeed cameras. It was identified that cameras were going to be needed down near, I think it's the block line area where the trains were coming in, and that the only way that they could have the cameras in a location that suited the tunnels was on city property. So that's what triggered this, but we're anticipating having other needs come up along the way. So this was more to assist in expediting things as things happen.
Well, I guess my concern, Ms. McDonald, would be that we just dealt with a report last week that we approved today that had us taking a position on a number of issues around urban design, including ultimately what may or may not happen with these hydro boxes above ground or below ground and so on. With this blanket encroachment authorization, it would seem to me that staff has the ability to deal with anything that we addressed today, or last week rather, without it coming back to council. And I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with that. Would that in fact be the case? Or is this purely on video cameras?
No, it's not. It's actually broader. It's definitely broader. So if that's not the wish or support of council, then I'd ask that you consider amending this resolution to deal specifically with the cameras. But it means then that each and every time there's a request from the region, you'll see a report coming back to council. And staff's quite prepared to do that.
Okay, Mayor, is there any other people? Okay, Councillor Etherington?
Just a follow-up question. Can I get a yes or no? Does this include the hydro substations, the enormous, very ugly substations?
To be honest, that was never discussed when my colleague, Mr. Ross, and I discussed this report. So I would have thought that would have been dealt with separately, and I know that there had been a report last week.
Maybe I could ask staff if it is separate.
Mr. Wilmer?
Responding to Councillor Vrbanovic's question, I would point out the last paragraph on page 4-1 and the last sentence of that. So it says that this blanket authority in no way dispenses with the critical staff circulation to various departments to determine if such encroachment is a risk to city or utility infrastructure. They'll be circulated in part to ensure where appropriate a high level of urban design. So we do share that concern and would address it at a staff level.
But you wouldn't bring those things back, is the point.
No, that's right. That we would deal with them staff to staff before we would be willing to sign the agreements. And I guess what's left unsaid there is that if at some point we reach a stalemate and aren't able to negotiate something, that we could bring that to council.
But there's some broad. Sorry, you have the floor.
That's okay. No, there's a lot of concern about the streetscape design features, including the hydro substations, as you know. And I would hate for no reflection on staff, but I want to have a say on that if those are to be approved.
Yes, my understanding is that all of those substations are on regional road allowances or on railway property, but I'm not aware of any on city road allowances.
That's correct, but we're supposed to have a say over those streetscape design features. Well, that's my question. Does it include those?
Councillor Etherington has the floor right now. I'll come to you, Mayor Zaire. Go ahead, Councillor Etherington.
So my question is, can we, in the situations of the substations and other streetscape design features, can we be certain those will come back to council?
Through the chair, I think the best way to be certain would be to exclude those from this recommendation.
Okay.
Okay. Councillor Gazzola, you're next. Can you turn him on?
Sorry, I'm trying to signal you who the next speaker is. Okay.
The report here talks about uploading streets to the region. What does that mean? Is this a backdoor way of amalgamating?
We've already done that. Not amalgamate.
Go ahead.
Briefly through the chair, as council is aware, there are certain streets that are regional roads, certain ones that are city streets. There are some of the streets that are proposed as part of the LRT route that are now city streets that the region has proposed they become regional roads. So we will be reporting back to council on that, and it's being referred to as an uploading.
Okay, so that's what I want. So it's transferring city to the region.
Yes.
Yeah. Can I make a comment about this?
Yeah, please make your comment now as well.
Yeah, I don't see the necessity of this. I don't know that it's that much more work to bring it here to council to approve these things. I'm sure that once staff does one of them, the format's pretty simple and it can come to council here. It may take us a couple of extra minutes here at council, but I don't see any necessity to bypass council on these issues. So I won't be supporting. I'll support this one particular one that's before us, but I don't see the need for a blanket.
Councillor Fernandez?
Thank you. You've raised a number of good points, Councillor Vanovich, and I think that it's probably prudent for us, and given that our city solicitor has already said that they were willing to bring it back to council, I think maybe we may need to amend this recommendation a little bit so that we are very clear on what those encroachment agreements are and what they include. I think that maybe I'll leave you to add some of that wording because you raised the concern first, but I think you raised some good points here.
Okay. Councillor Etherington's already indicated that he'll do that, but Mayor Zare, you were next, I think, on the list?
Yeah, just very briefly, it was simply to say that we're talking about the encroachment agreement for those things that are on city property, not something that, and this is speaking to the point that Mr. Wilmer mentioned in terms of the other issues, that we're dealing in another way, in another resolution, we're dealing with those streetscape issues. That's not what this is about. This is anything that happens to be on our property. And I have no problem with coming back, but I just want to make that clear. If we just, it sounds like if we simply delete the words as well as indemnification related to LRT-related infrastructure, and we just specifically state it's for video cameras at this point.
And, well, in fact, Councillor, if you can, Councillor Etherington, to turn Councillor Etherington on, I think that was the amendment he was going to make.
Okay, and that's fine. Councillor Davey was next.
Go ahead.
Yeah, my amendment would be that we approve this, but that there be an amendment to exclude approval of the substations and other street design features which should be brought back to council.
Councillor Etherington, maybe cleaner if we just adjust the video cameras for now and we can have the other reports come back?
Sure.
Okay, just sorry if I may.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Before we do that, I just want to be clear too. Like, if it's not just video cameras. Ms. McDonald said it's going to be things other than video cameras. And it's going to bog down the process. So, can you speculate as to what it might be? Like, I don't think council particularly cares about encroachment agreements for wires underground, for example. So, can you suggest some language that might address our concerns?
I can tell you there have been wires that have had to be adjusted and moved on to city property that I am aware of. In terms of other things, I mean, right now our resolution that's currently in place deals with like benches and so forth. There may be things like that, some structures that need to be placed on city road allowances. So it's contemplated to deal with anything that's related to the operation of the LRT.
But are those things not already covered off?
The way the resolution, the way the current resolution is worded, it deals with obviously the Grand River Transit. You could argue that it applies to LRT because it's in the same vein to provide the transit service, but this was really to be specific to things initiated as a result of the LRT.
Okay, Councillor Davey, you have the floor still.
Sorry, so then would it be helpful to just... Wouldn't it be helpful then to just say any existing encroachment agreements we have with GRT extends to LRT, period?
or the delegation process for any encroachment agreements.
Exactly. Right.
That are already delegated to staff, including video cameras, are delegated, and that would leave anything else to come to us.
May I suggest probably the best thing, Mr. Ross has been more intimately involved in this than I have, and he's part of the group that talks about the LRT situation. Let us bring back a new report with a revised recommendation.
I move deferral.
May I make a suggestion before that deferral is moved?
Okay, Mr. Wilman?
May I suggest that we, for the purpose of tonight, simply delete the words infrastructure including. So tonight you would give a blanket a delegation for video cameras, and we can report back on other things that we think fit into that same general intent.
Okay. That's the motion that's on the floor. Everyone's comfortable with that? All those in favor? Oh. So the motion is that we're only delegating video cameras and that the rest will come back after staff have had an opportunity to confer with another report at our next meeting. Is that clear, Councillor Yanetsky? Okay, so all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Madam Clerk, is there any other items? Okay, does somebody want to move that the committee rise and report? Moved by Councillor Ioannidis. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Mr. Mayor, I move that the proceedings in the recorded pecuniary interests and conflicts taken in the meeting of the Committee of the Whole held this date, as attached here too, and forming part of these minutes, are hereby adopted and confirmed, and it's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Davey.
All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. It's been moved by Councillor Singh, seconded by Councillor Yanetsky, that the bylaws be given third reading. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And it's moved by Caleb Seelock. It's moved by Councillor Galloway Seelock that we adjourn.